This is Quarina, and you're listening to Bold, Brown and British, a weekly podcast where we discuss what it means to be a brown person in a Western world. We've spoken about colorism, third culture identity, and dating, amongst many others on this podcast. So if this sounds like the type of content that you want to hear, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also message us on Instagram. The handle is @BoldBrownAndBritish, or drop us an email via our website at www.boldbrownbritish.com. So without further ado, let's get on with this week's episode.
Ever wanted more? Not just a better job or a fancier postcode, but the whole damn buffet of life. Today, we're diving into a book that doesn't whisper that desire, it screams it. Hello, my lovely samosas. It's me, Quarina, your unapologetically brown host of Bold, Brown and British, the podcast where we simmer the spice of modern city life in Britain and America with a generous side of wit, wisdom, and a raised eyebrow at societal expectations. Now listen, today's episode is not for the faint-hearted or the satisfied. We're talking about A Splintering by Aziz Amna, an unforgettable novel soaked in ambition, obsession, and the many-layered madness that is motherhood. Our main girl, Tara, she's not playing it safe. She's breaking free from village life, from her violent brother, from middle-class monotony. And she wants more. In a world that's designed to cage women in a child-centered domesticity, what does more cost? So I had the absolute pleasure and low-key stress, actually, of reading this book in one sitting. And let me tell you, it shook me. Things sweat, grit, desperation, desire, serve the side of patriarchy and political unrest. So let's get straight into it. I'm sitting down with the brilliant Duray herself to talk about rage, respectability, and the rebellious spirit of brown womanhood. Strap in. Hi, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So listen, I'm going to start bold. Who is Tara to you? Is she a product of trauma, a mirror, ambition that society refuses? Who is she to you?
That's a great question. I think that Tara to me is an amalgamation of a lot of women that I've known throughout my life who have a lot of the same rage and ambition that she does. But because it's fiction, I'm able to play around with sort of, as you already pointed out, the limits to what she is able to go to and the limits to what she's able to go do while also getting away with it, which is very critical. Because usually, as we know in real life, a lot of the times, the only thing a woman has to do is slightly overstep a limit, and she is immediately reprimanded and immediately put back into her corner. But that is not the case for Tara for most of the book, without giving too many spoilers. And so I think that I wanted to use the mold of fiction to create a character who is actually able to get away with things, is actually able to test the limits that society puts on women.
Yeah, and talking of this kind of pressure and expectation from society, you write really vividly about the class system in Pakistan, dusty village life versus middle-class pretension. How do you see classism playing out in kind of Western diaspora communities like ours? And how does that kind of compare?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, I can speak, more to what I noticed in the US, which I know is significantly different than the UK. And in fact, my mother was in Glasgow for a few years doing her PhD program. So I was in and out of the UK for a while. And I think that to me, the thing that struck me the most, and I think a lot of people talk about this, is, how a lot of it's particularly Pakistani diaspora in the UK, at least the older generation tends to be pretty working class, just because there's a lot of people who were brought there to work in, I believe there's this, what I know a good amount about is that there a lot of people were relocated from the Kashmir area.
Oh, I've lost your sound.
Yeah.
No, back again. Sorry.
Okay. Do you want me to I'm a little nervous about, actually let's try again, because it said right now, like just 5 minutes ago, that my internet connection was unstable, and I'm not at home. I'm at this like other rental, and So if it happens again, I will try hot spotting, but let's continue for now.
Yes. Sorry,
But
continue.
anyways, so the diaspora that I could talk most about is the US based Desi diaspora. And I I mean, it's interesting. I think a lot of the times those same class patterns obviously do reproduce themselves abroad as well. I think the one difference, I believe, which is positive, is that when you are abroad, a lot of those class markers from home sort of don't exist, or at least don't exist as vividly anymore. And so I've had frequently the experience of being with a Pakistani in the US and sitting with them and eating with them and having it in my mind that, this likely would not be happening back home because you're bound by a different set of class expectations and borders.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, Going back to kind of Tara, there's a kind of a very physical intensity to her longing, you know. But how do you kind of find the balance between portraying her hunger without kind of falling into the unlikable woman trap that a lot of female characters are often kind of squeezed into?
Yeah. What's hilarious is that the book is obviously not out yet, but I know that there's been interest and there's people who are reading the book and reviewing it, and sometimes you end up wandering into that part of the internet that like reviews your books and which is not good for your mental health generally. But I mean, the reviews have generally been very good. Um, but there is again and again that feeling, particularly from men, of God, but she's so unrelatable. She's so bad. And there's two ways in which I approach it. I don't know who it was. It might have been the writer Claire Massoud, or maybe I'm misquoting her, but there was someone who once got very annoyed by this question because she said, I don't write fiction to make friends. I have my own friends, so I'm not making these women so that I can befriend them. They're not supposed to be, I'm not trying to make them likable, but also I don't really find her that unlikable.
I
Do,
don't. I thought you did a really good job in balancing that kind of portrayal for hunger, but being really realistic of,
yeah, because again, to me, I feel like a lot of that hunger and a lot of that ambition and a lot of that very, as you said, that's a great word, material hunger to, materially improve the life of yourself and your children. A lot of what she's doing is very much aimed at improving the lives of her children. It feels so familiar to me. I mean, that's the kind of group of people that I grew up with, which was, you were that provincial migrant, you were born and raised in this small town, and then you came to the city. And unless you really, really worked very hard and you did all the various, you like made friends and you made connections and you like hustled, as they say, you weren't going to make it. And so to me, that all feels very familiar. And I fully empathize with that part of her, if not, the limits to which she goes to. So I guess the very long way of answering this question, but I never really considered her unlikable. And I'm really able to sort of inhabit her longing because that is the longing and the ambition of so many people that I know and grew up with.
yeah, and there's almost what I found was a simmering sensuality in this book, right? That is rarely afforded to South Asian female characters. And I love that about it. But did you feel pressure in like writing that side of Dara, knowing that how culturally taboo that could be, without again giving too much away? It's kind of the vaguest I could.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's no question that, there are certain parts of the book that, I mean, I don't really think that it's a very explicit book in any way, but I can see anyone who is out to look, to be offended might find things of offense in the book. The the way it works is that when I write, I'm not able to think about those externalities. There is nothing that I will not put in the book because of how it might be perceived
Yeah.
by the reader or by society or by culture. Um, Having written it, there's, I mean, again, as I said, anyone who's out to be offended might be offended, but I don't think that it's possible for me to really write the book with that reader in mind.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Going back, I guess, shifting slightly to her relationship now. So her relationship with motherhood feels both tender and transactional. And I guess that's a reflection of similarly to her relationship with her mother, and her mom as well. Was that intentional, or was that kind of a byproduct of just the person and the character itself?
I think that it is a byproduct of how she is, because she's raised in a certain place where everything does feel so transactional. She's raised with, three other sisters and a brother, and there's this constant feeling that the brother is always put on this pedestal. He also always sort of hangs the fact that he pays for their food and their accommodation as sort of this threat over them, that, I'm doing you a certain favor because I'm the one who works outside the house and brings in the money for the utilities and for the groceries and whatnot. And so she is always trained to think of relationships as very transactional. I do think that there's something, to me at least, the sort of, I mean, I don't really think that any relationship is, just pure, obviously, but I do think that there are certain moments in the book where her relationship with her children, and I think she acknowledges it too, which is that it's the purest relationship that she has, the least muddled or muddied relationship that she has. And yet, because of her ambitions and because of the way she's thinking about improving her life, there's some of that obviously comes into her relationship with them as well. And I think the mother is very interesting because the mother, to her mother personifies or symbolizes that what she's left behind or what she's trying to leave behind, and the sort of like the improvement that she's made in her life from the other women in her life. And so when the mother, through certain circumstances, was also able to move into the city and live in an even bigger house and have even better furniture, to her, it feels like a personal feeling that she hasn't been able to
Achieve anything.
achieve.
Yeah. And I thought the most tender moment that she had with her children is the scene around the birthday. And I just thought that was just beautifully written, in that moment, you could completely understand what she's feeling, why she's feeling it, and where her thought processes are. And you're right, this idea of her brother really does loom large. Was he meant to kind of represent a literal set, or did obviously there's a symbolic, but was there ever a moment where you wanted him to represent not just patriarchy, but a literal threat to her?
Yeah, so the brother is very interesting because there's always, when you're writing, there's all these things that you're thinking about either half consciously, subconsciously. And so one of the things that I was thinking about is, I don't know if you know of the case of Kandil Baloch. She was this sort of very famous / infamous internet star. She would post these videos and talk to people. She had a huge social media presence, and she was Pakistan based. And some of her videos, they were, I don't know, I actually haven't seen a lot of her content, but they offended some people. And so her brother, out of the sense of honor, ended up killing her. And it was a very, very, the case made a lot of headlines. It was all over the news, both in Pakistan and abroad. The brother was then caught, and I believe eventually acquitted. And so I was specifically thinking about that case too, but also just generally the honor killing obviously is such a, not that, I guess, I don't know, that's not part of the book at all. But this idea of the brother as or that like close family relative as the protector of your honor, and as this person who just looms large over your life, and affects every single decision that you make, was very active in my mind. So a lot of the way I thought of him was as a symbol. And I think with a lot of the book, I think a lot of what Tara does, a lot of the decisions that she makes are also, I was thinking of them partly at this very practical material level that we talked about, but also at the symbolic level. And so the brother also to me feels very much like a symbol of that system.
Yeah. So we can't talk about the work without talking about the kind of politically tense and frequently chaotic kind of setting that is kind of set in. How did you see kind of politics intersecting with, I guess, present women's interior lives, particularly in kind of post-colonial societies?
Yeah, yeah. I think that I grew up with so much, I mean, it's the classic sort of, you ask any South Asian writer writing in English and they're like bookshelf, especially, I mean, if they were born and raised in South Asia, it's kind of almost hilarious how similar it sounds like all our bookshelves were. We were reading, Dickens and Bronte, and we were reading Virginia Woolf, and we were reading a lot of like that very classic British canon. And it feels to me that obviously in a lot of those books, history or the present it receded, particularly I'm thinking of the Jane Austen books, and there's so much to be said about those books, but they're not providing that kind of commentary on, the what's happening outside of the houses at all. And then similarly, and then when I moved to the US, a lot of the fiction that's written here also feels to me as extremely ahistorical. And I think that's obviously also because for a very long time now, the US has been able to fully, I think people here are just extremely innocent and naive because they've just, a lot of what happens in the world as a result of their government is never really made clear to them, or the after effects are never clear to them. And so I found it so refreshing and so new to write about this very, very interior. To me, the book is very interior. It really goes deep into her psyche and it plumbs everything that's in her head. But at the same time, it's impossible to ignore everything that's going on in the 90s in Pakistan in the early 2000s. And one big influence in that regard, I would say, is the work of Elena Ferrante. I don't know if you've read the quartet. Yeah, they're truly, I'm actually rereading them right now, and there's so much to be said about those books, but at some level I'm also like, she's just a witch. She's a magician. She just does it, and then we don't need to investigate how she's doing it because it's just so mind-blowingly good. But one of the things that I remember really being inspired by the first time I read the books was how history and politics were weaved in. And so like there's this one scene in, I think it's the third book, where there's a huge earthquake that was an actual earthquake that happened in Sicily. But when Ferrante writes about it, it's solely through the lens of the characters. And it's so she talks about how Leela feels like her margins are dissolving. She feels like the boundaries in her head. It's a very, very interior. I'm like not really doing justice to it. But the point is that she uses that earthquake to explore the psyche of her characters. She's not interested in, the political ramifications or the larger setting of it. She's using these historical moments as a way to investigate her characters' internal lives more. And I wanted to use that same model where there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. There's history, there's things that were major headlines at that time that continue to have reverberations for the country. But the book's purpose is to use them to investigate the characters' lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved how you used those historical and political timeline to tell how long time had been in between, event one and event two. And I really like that kind of the book isn't political in that sense. It's not really historical. It's not retelling history, but it
Right.
uses that, to kind of be like, oh, actually, it must have been a year since then or then because of these political things that happened.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of, I found it great how you kind of grounded time using history, and it kind of brought in that multi-layered kind of attitudes that I think, particularly living in the Western world, in the UK and the US, we often feel, because we're often moved and lived by timelines that happen back home, as I said, rather than
Yeah.
just here. Yes, I found that
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. No, for sure, for sure. And I think to me it was also a very fine balance because I wanted to stay true to Tara's character, which is that and she says it again and again, she's not a person whose sort of husband is, very interested in history and reads all these books, but Tara's a doer.
Yeah.
She says books bore her, she doesn't care about history. And so there was this thin balance. There were actually certain things that I had in earlier drafts that ended up taking out because it felt like, oh, a character like Tara would not really be saying this, or she won't really be mentioning all these. For her, history again is, as you said, like it's those time markers. It's like, okay, it was that year where like this happened, but what was actually more important is that in my life,
This
this
is
was happening.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it feels like the whole writing and the whole book feels like a rebellion and a reckoning all at once. If I guess however much you're comfortable in saying so, what personal experiences did you pull from writing A Splintering?
Yeah, so what was a big relief about writing A Splintering right after writing my debut, which is called American Fever, and it's a very autobiographical book. It's about a young woman who moves from Pakistan to the US for an exchange year. And so a lot of what I drew from there was based from my own life. And there was this really funny experience that happened, which was that anytime someone would talk badly about the main character in that book, it was impossible for me not to take it personally because
Yeah.
and then when I started writing A Splintering, I was very adamant that it have absolutely nothing to do with my life. And I did not want to draw upon any kind of personal experience that, something major that happened to me. And so in that sense, it is entirely not autobiographical, with obviously the very important exception being that Tara's life. So I think she's born in 1970. And so that sort of makes her about, like my parents' age, but I don't a lot of the things that a lot of the things that she lives through are all things that were part of my childhood. So
Yeah.
obviously I was born and raised in the 90s and early 2000s Pakistan. And so a lot of the political events that are happening, a lot of what was good was that I didn't have to do a lot of sort of historical research because I know that,
Yeah.
this is how people made a phone call, and this is when the internet was introduced, and all of those things were already familiar to me. So I was working within a familiar landscape, but her story is entirely her own.
Yeah. Let's do a little bit of masala. Have you ever met a Tara in real life, or are we all Tara a little bit deep down?
Yeah, I think the latter. I'm sure that there have been people that I met in my life who, hewed much more closely to Atara than others. But I do really, really do firmly believe that there is a Tara hidden inside every woman. And I think that, as I said, there's anyone who is offended by her is I mean, of course, there's people can not like books for 3,000 reasons, but if anyone particularly finds the idea of Tara offensive, I think what they're grating against is this knowledge that we all have, which is that every woman does have the ability or the capacity to be a Tara, and most of us obviously decide not to be, for better or for worse. Maybe, I don't know, probably for the better, but yeah, I think I do believe that that sort of rebellion and that sort of questioning of everything that we're told to do. We all do it at certain levels, and Tara is just able to sort of really act upon those doubts and act upon those questions.
Yeah, and did you write it for a particular person or a group of people? As in, is this for every woman that wanted more? Is this for men saying like, hey, this is what the women in your life probably are feeling to a degree, like, or is it kind of a story that needed to be written and you weren't necessarily thinking of audience in mind, more of the story needs to be told?
Yeah, I had no audience in mind. Again, I think maybe with my first one, I feel like there were because there's when you're writing your first book, you're like trying to put yourself out into the world, and so I think that with that, I had more of a conscious thought process of, oh, I want to make this book authentic, and so I want to make sure that when a Pakistani reader reads it, they feel like it does justice
Mm-hmm.
to Pakistani culture or to the language and whatnot. But with this one, I think the reader fully receded from the background. I was writing it because I was very compelled by her story when she came to my mind, which the way all of this started was that I was walking down the street in New York with my husband, which has all these like really beautiful townhouses. And it's those, I'm sure obviously there's a ton in London too, where you were walking past it and all the curtains have been pulled back and so that you can see inside and you can see the beautiful like wall art on the walls and you can see those huge lamps and the bookshelves and I just joked to my husband that, oh, what would I give for a house like this? And he said, well, what would you give for a house like this? And then that's literally, it's amazing because a lot of times you don't remember exactly when a
Yeah.
project starts. But to me, that is exactly when the project started because I was like, oh, what if I did create a woman who would stop at nothing to
Yeah.
get what she did? And so that's sort of where I've actually completely forgotten what the question was, which is
It was just who was it written for if you had audience in mind.
yeah. So yes. So it was really, it started from that idea, and then once I started writing her, I found her such a compelling character that I just sort of went along with it. But I don't think that I'm not trying to. I don't even think that I was. This is a question that I think I was recently reading this book called Frantumaglia, which is a collection of essays and interviews with Elena Ferrante. And a lot of her books obviously can be read as feminist books, and she herself identifies as a feminist. She lived through a lot of, the major like women's rights movements and all of that. But she also makes this distinction that she says that she doesn't write her novels as she doesn't consider them acts of feminism. And I would very much I very much feel the same way too, that I'm not really writing Tara's story as a, like
Yeah.
go like women's
Yeah,
rights
yeah,
and what that's not really the point. It's not to educate men about the interior lives of women either. I don't think that novels are meant to educate because I think that we have other better sources of education for that, like
yeah, of
nonfiction and history and all of that.
course.
Um, so I just found her such a compelling character that I had to go down this rabbit hole with her, and I hope that readers will too.
Yeah, and I find it the reason I'm laughing is, when you're like, what would I give and what like where would I stop? And I kind of was like, gosh, I hope you don't go as far as that. I'm doing
Yes, yeah,
like,
no, I mean that's the thing. I again, like for probably for good reasons, we all decide that our limits are much lower than
yeah.
Tara. Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, I think your husband might have some words with you. Like, hang on.
Yes. Without giving too much away, yes, he would not
Yeah.
be too. Yeah.
Finally, what do you hope kind of us Desi girls, especially those navigating this tightrope of kind of tradition and freedom, take away from Tara's story?
I mean, again, going back to, I don't know if there's a lesson here. I think, um, because as you said, like Tara's limits are very specific, and I this doesn't feel like a book that's going to really give you the right lessons. Um, I do think if anything, the only sort of thing that I, I hope women can take away from this is that there's there's a flattening when we're put into, the mold of like the good wife or the good daughter or the good friend or the good, it's such a flattening of women's interior psyches. And I think that if anything, because a lot of what I was doing here was also her relationship with her mother and her relationship with her sisters. It's all so fraught. And a lot of like a big reason for why it's fraught is because they were raised in this particular setting where everything was scarce, and so attention was scarce and love felt like it was scarce, and so there's this constant battling it out even after they're no longer fighting for those things. But they're fraught relationships, they're complicated, and every single woman in the book is very complicated. And I think that I would just like women to know that it's obviously that is the truth of us, that we are all extremely complicated and complex people. And two, that for any, readers or writers in the audience, that they also try to investigate the various complexities of being a woman in today's age.
Yeah, and I think I love that about all the women, like female characters, actually, because I like, again, without giving too much away, I started the book kind of being like, oh my God, like especially about her mother, like, oh my God, okay, like I know exactly what this is going to be, a bit kind of irritated, a bit annoyed. And then I found myself really relating to her, being like, oh my gosh, she's so wise. Like she kind of saw a lot of things before they happened and tried to warn Tara in her own, like in her own way. And she's obviously got all these life experiences from herself, from like all the kind of other, village mothers and, stories that she's clearly heard, or people that she's interacted with. And I think we've all been there, right? Like where we've just not appreciated because of where, particularly our parents, or, or Tara in her case, her parents, in that, oh, that's just the, that's the city mentality, that's this mentality, that's because of this. Like we kind of channel them into boxes. And then I think it's only later you look back and you think, no, actually, hang on. These are also women who have interacted with other women and know about other stories. We're not as secular and siloed as I think we are, and that's quite.
Yeah. No, for sure.
And final question. I'd be really kind of curious. Why is splintering in terms of the title?
The title. So the title was actually a long saga. We battled with a lot of various potentials before we landed on this. And actually, for a long time, the book, which I still have a special place in my heart for this title, it was called Farewell Province. Because again, obviously it's the story of her moving from the village to the city. But a lot of people thought that it wasn't catchy enough, or it wasn't. I think there's a lot of ways in which the people who actually publicize and market and sell the books have to think about books in a different way, which I completely empathize with. But A Splintering, it came about because of, again, there's this feeling as one reads the book, as one goes down Tara's story, that there's this fracture in her. There's this sort of she's trying to be so many different things. She's the mother, and she's the wife, and she's the daughter, and she's the sister to this very, domineering man who still wants to control her life. And then there's this other role that she takes on that I will not reveal. But so there's this sense of a fractured self, because so many of those relationships are not in coherence with each other, particularly the last one that she takes on. And so it feels to her that she has splintered inside, that she has become small parts that have to remain hidden from each other. So she's not entirely able to tell her children, obviously, what she does. And I believe that is where there's some point where the word itself is also used in the book to sort of signify just this feeling of her having broken into various parts, and not being able to reveal those parts to various people in her life. Yeah.
Yeah. And was Sarah's fate always kind of known in your mind when you started writing it, or was this something that kind of evolved?
So I knew that I wanted to write about a woman roughly the age of my parents. And so it was sort of like going back in time. My first book had been very contemporary. It was about a woman who, a girl very much my age. And then I wanted to sort of investigate the generations before me. That still obviously very much overlapped with me. And so that's sort of where I started it off. I wanted to tell the story of a woman who moves from the village to the city, and then those further layers of her ambition and what she would do, what are the limits to which she would go, and all of that. That's sort of like piled on.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much for kind of bringing us a story that for me burned really deep and bright, and to everyone tuning in, may you always chase your ambition, challenge your tradition, and remember, something wanting more is the revolution. The Splintering will be out in early September, if I'm correct.
Yep.
It'll be out in early September, so please go buy it. I'll leave all the links that I can in the description. And until next time, sending you love and spice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Oh, Mikey, you made it till the end. I'm so happy. Well, listen, if you enjoyed what you heard and you want to hear more, subscribe to the podcast on, wherever you are listening to this. We are on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Deezer, TuneIn, Alexa, you name it, we're there. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. We also are on Instagram, which houses loads of behind-the-scenes audio snippets, polls, memes, and ways for you to get involved. So go follow us on Bold, Brown and British. That's the handle. And until next time, keep safe, my wonderful samosas.